Korean Mafia boss froze at anniversary dinner with his wife. His black ex-girlfriend walked in with triplet girls. He ruled Seoul's underworld with a calculated coldness that made even hardened criminals tremble. She was the woman he'd erased from his life but never from his heart. 5 years of perfect silence shattered in a single moment when she walked through the door of that restaurant, holding 3 little girls with his eyes. When the past collides with the present, even the most powerful men discover their empires are built on sand. Every choice has a consequence. Every secret demands payment. And tonight, Kang Min-ho's debt has come due. This is the story of a man who built his kingdom on lies, only to watch it crumble under the weight of a truth he never saw coming. Welcome to a tale of betrayal, redemption, and a love fierce enough to burn down an empire. Hello, everyone. I'm back with another Afro-Korean love story that will haunt you long after it ends. Today's tale explores what happens when duty collides with desire, when the life you've built faces the life you could have had. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and help us reach 100,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing you stories that cross boundaries and break hearts. Now let's begin. The Sapphire Palace was the kind of restaurant where power wasn't measured in volume but in silence. The kind of place where a single nod could decide a man's fate, where business deals worth billions were sealed with nothing more than a handshake and a knowing look. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings too high to touch, casting fractured light across tables where Seoul's elite pretended to be something other than what they were. Wolves in designer clothing, predators with perfect manners. Kang Min-ho sat across from his wife of 5 years, watching the candlelight flicker across her perfect features. Soo-jin was beautiful in that precise, calculated way that spoke of surgeons' hands and careful breeding. The daughter of Seoul's most respected judicial official, she represented everything his father had wanted for him: status, connections, legitimacy. The golden veneer that disguised the blood and violence that had built the Kang family fortune. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of playing the devoted husband while building his empire in the shadows. 5 years of a life so carefully constructed that sometimes even he believed the lie. Until the door opened. Min-ho didn't need to look up to know she had entered. Something in the air changed, charged with electricity, heavy with memory. His body recognized her presence before his mind could process it. 5 years since he'd walked away from her. 5 years since he'd convinced himself that duty mattered more than desire. 5 years of burying the memory of the only woman who had ever seen past his armor to the man beneath. Zara Robinson. The woman he'd left behind in America without explanation. The woman whose heart he'd shattered for the sake of family honor and criminal empire. The woman who now stood in the entrance of Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, more beautiful than his guilty dreams had allowed him to remember. But it wasn't Zara who made his blood freeze in his veins. It was the 3 little girls holding her hands. 3 identical faces with his mother's high cheekbones and his sharp, assessing eyes. 3 little girls, no older than 4 or 5, dressed in matching dresses with ribbons in their hair. 3 secrets made flesh, staring curiously around the restaurant as they clung to their mother's hands. The glass of whiskey in Min-ho's hand trembled, sending ripples across the amber surface. Soo-jin was still talking about some charity gala, her voice a distant hum beneath the roaring in his ears. His entire world narrowed to those 4 people standing in the entrance, the woman he'd never stopped loving and the 3 children who could only be his. Min-ho, Soo-jin's voice cut through his shock. Are you listening? You look like you've seen a ghost. 3 ghosts. 3 perfect, impossible ghosts with his blood running through their veins. Time slowed as Zara's eyes finally met his across the crowded restaurant. No surprise flickered across her features. No shock or anger or pleading. Just calm recognition and a silent warning. She'd known he would be here. This was no accident. The hostess led them to a table on the far side of the restaurant, but it might as well have been inches from his own. Every movement Zara made sent shockwaves through his carefully constructed world. The way she helped the girls into their seats, the gentle smile she gave them, the protective glance she cast in his direction. Each gesture was a bullet, tearing through the lies he'd built his life upon. 5 years. 5 years since he'd left her apartment in Boston, telling her that their relationship had been nothing but a temporary distraction during his time in America. 5 years since he'd boarded a plane back to Seoul to fulfill his duty as his father's son and heir. 5 years of convincing himself that he'd made the right choice, the only choice. And now the bill for that choice had come due, with interest 3 beautiful, innocent girls who carried his features in their faces and his sins in their blood. The weight of his father-in-law's expectations, his wife's oblivious chatter, his empire's constant demands, all of it crushed down on him as he calculated the impossible mathematics of this moment. How long had Zara known she was pregnant when he left? Why had she kept it from him? Why reveal it now, in this way, in this place? What could she possibly want after all this time? Revenge? Money? Recognition? Or something far more dangerous? The truth? Min-ho excused himself from the table, ignoring Soo-jin's confused protests. His legs carried him across the restaurant on autopilot, his mind racing ahead, strategizing, planning, calculating risk the way he'd been taught since childhood. But all his criminal genius failed him as he approached their table. For the first time in his adult life, Kang Min-ho had no plan, no angle, no escape route. He'd met Zara 7 years ago in Boston, where he'd been sent to complete his MBA, the legitimate face of the family business. She'd been a law student with a laugh that cracked his carefully maintained facade and eyes that saw through his practiced charm to the loneliness beneath. For 2 years, they'd built something real in the spaces between his lies. For 2 years, he'd allowed himself to imagine a different life, a different future, a different man he might become. Then his father had fallen ill, and the call had come. The heir must return. The dynasty must continue. The empire required its prince. And Min-ho had done what was expected. He'd cut all ties, severed all connections, buried all evidence of a relationship that had been deemed inappropriate, inconvenient, beneath the family's station. He'd married Soo-jin 6 months after returning to Seoul. The perfect political alliance. The judge's daughter and the businessman's son. No one mentioned the businesses that operated in the shadows, the bribes that ensured justice favored certain parties, the blood that occasionally needed cleaning from the family's hands. And now, 5 years later, his past and present collided with the force of worlds ending. As he reached their table, one of the girls looked up at him with his own eyes, dark, intelligent, assessing. The girl nudged her sister, who nudged the third, and suddenly 3 identical faces turned to study him with unnerving intensity. "Hello, Min-ho." Zara's voice was steady, neither warm nor cold, just factual, like his presence was nothing more than a minor footnote in her evening. The practiced words died in his throat. All his carefully crafted control evaporated under the gaze of these 3 little girls who shared his blood. These children who existed because of a love he'd abandoned, who had grown in a world separate from his, who had his features but none of his sins. "Mommy, who is this man?" one of the girls asked, her English perfect but her eyes suspicious in a way that reminded him painfully of his own mother. "An old friend," Zara replied, never taking her eyes off his face. "From before you were born." Min-ho felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Friend. Such a small, inadequate word for what they had been to each other. For what they might have been, in another life, another world, another story where duty didn't trump desire and family legacy didn't require sacrificing love. "They're mine." Not a question but a statement, spoken so softly that only Zara could hear. "They're mine," she corrected firmly. "They have been since the day you walked away." The restaurant continued its elegant dance around them, waiters gliding between tables, glasses clinking, soft laughter punctuating the instrumental music, while Min-ho's world imploded in silence. From across the room, he could feel Soo-jin's curious gaze, could sense the questions forming on her perfectly painted lips. 5 minutes before his carefully constructed life would begin to unravel. 5 minutes before the consequences of his choices would become unavoidable. "We need to talk." His voice came out rougher than intended, the control he prided himself on fraying at the edges. "Yes, we do." Zara's gaze flickered to Sujin, then back to him. But not here, not now. Not in front of them. Then when? The question contained multitudes. When had she known about the pregnancy? When had she decided to come to Seoul? When had she planned this ambush? When would he get answers to the questions burning through his mind like acid? Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Children's Grand Park. She handed him a business card with a number scrawled on the back. Come alone, or don't come at all. One of the girls tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, I'm hungry. Zara's entire demeanor changed, softening as she turned to her daughter. Their daughter. I know, baby. We're going to eat now. She looked back at Minho, her expression hardening again. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Don't be late. He walked back to his table feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Sujin's questions washed over him. Who was that woman? How did he know her? Why did he look so pale? He answered with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his life hiding truths behind half-truths. An old acquaintance from his time in America. Nothing important. Nothing that would threaten the perfect life they'd built together. But as his eyes kept drifting to the table where Zara sat with 3 little girls who had his blood running through their veins, Minho knew the foundations of his empire had just begun to crumble. The night passed in a blur of sleeplessness and whiskey. Minho stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching Seoul spread before him like a carpet of lights. So many of those lights connected to businesses he controlled, buildings he owned, people who feared his name. He'd built this kingdom brick by bloody brick, expanding what his father had created, legitimizing what could be legitimized, hiding what needed to remain in shadow. And now 3 small girls threatened everything without even knowing his name. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sujin slept peacefully in their king-sized bed, oblivious, innocent in ways that sometimes made him despise her. She'd never asked questions about his family's business, had never wanted to know where the money came from or why certain men bowed so deeply when they passed. She took the designer clothes and charity board positions and social status without ever questioning the price paid for them. She was exactly what his father had wanted for him. Beautiful, well-connected, discreet, the perfect ornament for a man balancing between worlds. She was everything Zara was not. Zara with her sharp mind and sharper questions. Zara, who had challenged him, argued with him, forced him to defend his choices until he couldn't tell if he was convincing her or himself. Zara, who had looked at the carefully constructed mask he showed the world and had simply asked to see what lay beneath. And he had shown her. God help him. He had shown her parts of himself he'd never revealed to another living soul. His doubts about the family business. His dreams of legitimacy. His fear that he was becoming what he had always dreaded. A man like his father, cold and calculating, measuring everything and everyone by their usefulness. For 2 years, Zara had made him believe he could be more than his legacy. Then duty had called, and he had answered without hesitation, cutting her from his life with surgical precision. He told himself it was cleaner that way, kinder even. A clean break rather than a slow, painful dissolution as distance and duty pulled them apart. He'd never given her the chance to tell him about the pregnancy. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She must have discovered it after he left. After he'd made it clear there was no future for them. After he'd returned to Seoul and married another woman within months. The wedding announcement splashed across international business publications. What choice had she had but to raise them alone? But why come back now? Why bring them into his world after keeping them safely away for 5 years? The questions circled like vultures as dawn broke over the city. His city. The kingdom he'd built that suddenly felt like a prison. At precisely 2 p.m., Minho entered Children's Grand Park alone, having dismissed his security detail with a firmness that brooked no argument. He'd never walked these pathways before, had never had reason to visit a place designed for families and children. It felt foreign, this world of laughter and innocence, as if he were trespassing in a realm not meant for men with blood on their hands. He spotted them near the playground, Zara sitting on a bench, watching the 3 girls race around the equipment with the boundless energy of childhood. They were dressed differently today, their individual personalities evident in their clothing choices despite their identical faces. One in overalls with a book clutched under her arm. One in a dress with a toy camera hanging around her neck. One in jeans and a t-shirt with scraped knees that spoke of fearless adventures. 3 different souls sprung from the same source. His daughters. The word felt alien in his mind, impossible and yet undeniable. Zara saw him approaching and straightened her spine, armor going up visibly. She was dressed simply. Jeans and a sweater, her braids pulled back in a style he remembered running his fingers through on lazy Sunday mornings that felt like another lifetime ago. She was still beautiful, but there was a hardness to her now, a protective shell he'd never seen before. Motherhood had made her a warrior. "You came," she said as he sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might send lawyers, or threats, or both. I considered it." The honesty slipped out before he could stop it. She nodded, unsurprised. "That would have been a mistake." "Why are you here, Zara? Why now after 5 years?" The questions that had kept him awake all night. She watched the girls play for a long moment before answering. "I'm here because I was offered a position at Seoul National University Hospital, a fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery that I couldn't turn down. And bringing them here to my city? Was that professional advancement as well?" A flash of the old fire in her eyes. "They're not a weapon, Minho. They're children. Our children, whether you want to acknowledge that or not." "You never told me." The accusation hung between them, heavy with 5 years of lost time. "You never gave me the chance." Her voice remained level, but he could hear the anger beneath, carefully controlled for the sake of the children within eyesight. "You ended things and disappeared. By the time I found out I was pregnant, you were engaged to someone else." The timeline hit him like a sledgehammer. He'd announced his engagement to Sujin just 2 months after returning to Seoul. 2 months in which Zara had discovered her pregnancy, had tried to process what it meant, had perhaps even tried to contact him. "You could have told me anyway. To what end? So you could offer money? A convenient settlement to keep your dirty secret hidden from your perfect bride?" The bitterness finally seeped through. "I didn't want your money, Minho. I wanted the man I fell in love with, the one who talked about changing his family's legacy, about building something legitimate he could be proud of. But that man vanished the minute Daddy called him home." The truth of her words stung because he couldn't deny them. He had abandoned his dreams of change, of legitimacy, of being different from his father. He had stepped into the role prepared for him with a resignation that had calcified into acceptance over the years. "What are their names?" he asked instead of defending himself. Something in Zara softened slightly. "Mina, Jia, and Sora. Korean names. I wanted them to have a connection to that part of their heritage. Unspoken, the part you denied them." "Which is which?" "Mina is the one with the book. She started reading at 3 and hasn't stopped since. Jia has the camera. She notices everything, documents the world like she's afraid it might disappear if she doesn't capture it. And Sora is the one currently doing what appears to be a death-defying leap from the jungle gym. She's fearless, that one." Minho watched them with hunger, trying to memorize their movements, their expressions, the sound of their laughter carried on the autumn breeze. His children, his blood, his legacy in a form he'd never anticipated. "They don't know about me." Again, not a question. "No. They know their father was Korean, that he lived in America for a while, that he had to go back to his family. That's all. And now, the question that terrified him most. What do you want from me, Zara? Why tell me at all? Why not just continue as you have been?" She turned to face him fully then, her expression unreadable. "Because we're here now. Because they deserve more than lies. Because sooner or later, they're going to start asking questions I won't be able to answer alone. They're better off without me in their lives. Without the complications I would bring." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "That's not your decision to make anymore." Her voice hardened again. "You gave up that right when you walked away. My world is dangerous, Zara. You know that. You've always known that. And yet here you sit, in the sunlight, watching children play like any normal father would. She shook her head. You were always more than your family's business, Minho. You just chose not to be. One of the girls, Sora, the fearless one, spotted them and came running over, curiosity evident in her expression. Minho felt his body tense, unprepared for this moment, for this introduction that was not an introduction. Mommy, who's your friend? Sora asked, looking at Minho with his own eyes, with his mother's directness. This is Mr. Kong. He's an old friend from when Mommy lived in America. You look like someone, Sora said, studying him with unsettling intensity. Someone in Mommy's pictures. Minho's eyes flashed to Zara, who shook her head slightly. Sora has an active imagination, she explained, and a very good memory. She's probably thinking of someone else. But the girl continued staring, unconvinced. No, I've seen you before. Sora, why don't you go tell your sisters it's almost time to go? Zara suggested gently. The girl hesitated, then nodded, racing back to the playground with a backward glance that contained too much knowing for a 5-year-old. She's like you, Zara said quietly after she'd gone. Sees everything, misses nothing. What pictures was she talking about? I kept a few, hidden away. Sometimes I take them out when... She trailed off, then straightened her spine. It doesn't matter. What matters is what happens now. And what does happen now? What do you expect from me? The businessman in him needed parameters, boundaries, clear expectations. I expect you to decide what kind of man you want to be. Zara stood, gathering her bag. A man who knows his daughters, or a man who pretends they don't exist. A man who honors his blood, or a man who denies it for the sake of appearances. It's not that simple. It never is. She called to the girls, who came running immediately. A unit, a team, a family complete without him. We're staying at the Grand Hyatt for now. Room 1742. You have until the end of the week to decide if you want to be part of their lives. After that, I'll assume your silence is your answer. She walked away with 3 little girls trailing behind her like ducklings, leaving Minho alone on a bench in a children's park, surrounded by families living the kind of normal life that had never been an option for him. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to acknowledge his children and risk destroying the life he'd built, or to turn his back on his own blood for the sake of empire and family honor. As he walked back to his car, Minho realized that for all his power, all his wealth, all his control, he had never felt more cornered in his life. The revelation devastated his carefully ordered existence. Minho moved through his world like a ghost, present in body but absent in mind. Business meetings blurred together, conversations with Sujin became exercises in deception, and nights stretched endlessly as he warred with himself over what to do. His father-in-law noticed first. Judge Chun was not a man who had risen to his position by missing details. Over a private lunch in his chambers, the older man studied Minho with the same clinical detachment he used on defendants in his courtroom. You seem troubled, son. The familial address was calculated, a reminder of Minho's place in the family structure. Anything I should be concerned about? Minho had perfected the art of lying to powerful men. Just business concerns. Nothing that won't resolve itself. Business concerns don't usually make a man look at his wife as if she's suddenly become a stranger. Chun set down his chopsticks with precision. I've known you since you were a boy, Minho. I've watched you grow into the man who leads the Kong family business. I approved my daughter's marriage to you because I believed you understood the value of family, of loyalty, of maintaining appearances. The implied threat hung in the air between them. The Chun and Kong families were linked by more than marriage. They were linked by mutually assured destruction. The judge who looked the other way, the businessman whose transactions sometimes required judicial blindness. Partnership built on shared secrets. My loyalty to Sujin has never wavered. The lie tasted sour. See that it doesn't. Chun smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Because in our world, family is everything. And those who threaten family rarely survive the experience. The warning followed Minho back to his office, where reports awaited his attention and decisions required his signature. The empire demanded constant maintenance, shipments to approve, territories to defend, alliances to maintain. The machinery of power ground forward relentlessly, requiring his full attention at the very moment his mind was elsewhere. Room 1742. A hotel suite where three little girls with his eyes were living a temporary existence, while their mother waited for an answer he wasn't sure he could give. His phone rang. Sujin, reminding him of the charity gala that evening. Another performance of perfect domestic harmony. Another evening of pretending to be nothing more than a successful businessman with a beautiful wife. The masks were suffocating him. At midnight, after Sujin had fallen asleep, Minho stood in their home office staring at a locked drawer in his desk. With hands that refused to tremble, he unlocked it and removed a small wooden box he hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside lay the only evidence he'd kept of his time with Zara. A single photograph taken at a beach in Cape Cod, her smile radiant as she leaned against him, his arm around her waist, his expression unguarded in a way it never was in Seoul. They looked happy. They had been happy. He had destroyed that happiness for the sake of duty, for family honor, for an empire built on fear and blood money. And now 3 innocent girls carried that same blood in their veins, unknowing heirs to a legacy they had no part in creating. Minho made his decision at dawn, as the first light broke over the Han River. He dressed with care in the most casual clothes he owned. Still designer, still expensive, but without the armor of his usual suits. No tie to choke him, no cufflinks to weigh him down. He left without waking Sujin, the coward's way out, but necessary for what he needed to do. The Grand Hyatt lobby was quiet at 7 a.m. Minho took the elevator to the 17th floor, his heart pounding with an emotion he refused to name. Fear, perhaps, or hope, or both intertwined until he couldn't separate them anymore. He knocked on door 1742, not allowing himself to hesitate, to reconsider, to retreat back into the safety of denial. Zara opened the door, surprise evident in her expression. She wore pajamas, her hair wrapped in a scarf, no makeup, a private version of herself he had no right to see anymore. Minho, it's 7 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. I needed to see you before. He trailed off, uncertain how to continue. She stepped back, allowing him entry with reluctance. The suite was spacious but showed signs of being lived in. Toys scattered across the floor, small shoes lined up near the door, picture books stacked on the coffee table. A family space, temporary but real. The girls are still asleep, she said quietly, leading him to the small kitchenette. They won't be up for another hour. Good. I wanted to talk to you first. Minho gathered his courage, the words he'd rehearsed all night suddenly inadequate. I want to know them, Zara. I want to be part of their lives. She studied him, looking for deception, for ulterior motives. As what? Their father? Or as mommy's friend, who appears occasionally with expensive gifts? I don't know yet. The honesty cost him, but he owed her that much. I just know I can't walk away from them again. Not now that I've seen them. Not now that I know they exist. And your wife? Your in-laws? Your criminal empire? The questions cut like knives. Where do they fit into this decision? I don't know that either. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he would never allow himself in public. I just know I have to try. I have to find a way to be part of their lives without endangering them. Zara's expression softened slightly, the first crack in her armor. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They're not accessories, Minho. They're not property or possessions or extensions of your ego. They're people. Small, still developing people with hearts that can be broken and trust that can be shattered. I know. Do you? Because the man who left me in Boston didn't seem to understand that people aren't disposable once they become inconvenient. The accusation landed with precision, as she had intended it to. I deserve that. Yes, you do. And much more. She poured herself a cup of coffee, not offering him one. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what they deserve. 3 little girls who have done nothing wrong, who shouldn't have to pay for our mistakes. They're not mistakes. The words escaped before he could stop them. They're the only thing in my life that isn't tainted. Something shifted in Zara's expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. I'll allow supervised visits. Once a week to start. We'll tell them you're an old friend who wants to get to know them. Nothing more until we see how it goes. Relief washed through him, so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Her voice hardened again. The first time you disappoint them, the first time you put your other life ahead of them, the first hint that your world might touch theirs in a dangerous way, we're gone. And this time you won't find us. I understand. A sound from one of the bedrooms. A child stirring. The beginning of the day. Zara glanced toward the noise, then back at Minho. You should go. We'll set something up for the weekend. Somewhere public, somewhere safe. He nodded, already moving toward the door, unwilling to complicate this morning with his presence. But at the threshold, he paused, unable to leave without asking the question that had burned inside him since the restaurant. Why did you really come back, Zara? After all this time, why Seoul? She looked at him for a long moment, measuring her words carefully. Because they deserve to know where they come from. All of it, the good and the bad. And because 5 years of silence was long enough. As Minho left the hotel, the weight of 5 years of ignorance pressed down on him like a physical burden. 5 years of first steps and first words. 5 birthdays he'd missed. 5 years of his daughters growing without knowing his name or his face or the complicated legacy they carried in their blood. He had built an empire on the bones of his conscience, had sacrificed love for duty, had chosen family honor over personal happiness. And now the bill for those choices had come due, paid in the currency of 3 little girls who shared his eyes but not his sins. The revelation of his children detonated like a bomb in the carefully ordered structure of Minho's existence. Each supervised visit to parks, to museums, to child-friendly cafes, carved out pieces of his heart he hadn't known still existed. Each tentative connection formed with Mina, Jia, and Sora eroded the foundations of the life he'd built without them. Mina with her serious questions that revealed a mind already questioning the world around her. Jia with her camera constantly documenting everything as if afraid memories might fade if not captured. Sora with her fearless spirit and uncanny ability to see through pretense. They didn't know he was their father. To them, he was just Mr. Kong, their mother's friend who appeared on weekends with carefully chosen gifts that showed he was paying attention. Books for Mina that challenged her curious mind, art supplies for Jia that encouraged her visual storytelling, sports equipment for Sora that channeled her boundless energy. Zara watched these interactions with guarded caution, her armor lowering gradually as weeks passed without Minho disappointing her expectations. She began allowing him more time, more freedom with them, even stepping away occasionally to give them space to develop relationships independent of her watchful gaze. But as his connection with his daughters strengthened, the fractures in his other life widened into chasms. Sujin noticed first, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the strain of unexplained absences and emotional distance. Where do you go every Saturday? She finally demanded one night, her voice breaking the silence of their expansive bedroom. Who is she? The question contained multitudes. Not just who was the other woman, but who was the man Sujin had married? Who was the stranger wearing her husband's face? Who was the man she thought she knew? Minho had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed lies and half-truths that would maintain the fragile peace of their marriage. But standing before his wife's tear-stained face, the practiced deceptions died in his throat. I have children, he said simply, the truth finally spoken aloud in this house built on lies. 3 daughters I didn't know existed until 2 months ago. The confession shattered something fundamental between them. Sujin's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, betrayal, anger, calculation. Finally, she settled on cold fury. With the American woman. The one from the restaurant. Yes. How old are they? 5. The mathematics were simple, damning. 5 years. Conceived before his return to Seoul, before their marriage, but a betrayal nonetheless. Not of wedding vows but of the unspoken contract between their families, the promise of a clean slate, of a future unburdened by past entanglements. Does my father know? The question revealed Soo-jin's true priorities: family reputation, public appearance, the alliance between powerful houses. Not yet. He'll destroy you for this. Not a threat but a certainty. He'll see it as a betrayal of everything our marriage represents. She was right, of course. Judge Chun would view these children not as innocent lives but as threats to the carefully constructed facade their families had built together. As vulnerabilities in Minho's armor that could be exploited. As leverage that could be used against him. I can't walk away from them. The truth, simple and devastating. They're my blood. Soo-jin studied him with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time the man beneath the mask he'd worn for 5 years. You love them. These children you barely know. Yes. The admission cost him nothing because it was undeniable. And their mother? Do you love her too? The question he'd been avoiding even in the privacy of his own thoughts. It's complicated. No, it's not. Soo-jin's laugh was brittle. It's actually very simple. You never stopped loving her. I was just the convenient alternative, the appropriate choice, the strategic alliance. He couldn't deny it, so he said nothing, the silence confirmation enough. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable. Minho had expected anger, tears, negotiation. Not this calm declaration of an ending. Your father. My father will have to accept that I refuse to be second choice in my own marriage. Steel entered her voice, revealing a strength he'd never fully appreciated. I deserve better than a husband whose heart belongs elsewhere. The divorce was only the first explosion. Judge Chen's rage followed, cold and calculating rather than explosive. The threats came disguised as concern, as warnings about what might happen to a man who violated the unwritten codes of their world. To a man who acknowledged children born outside the sanctified boundaries of strategic alliances. To a man who chose love over duty. The Kong family business began experiencing unexpected difficulties. Shipments delayed, permits denied, loyal employees suddenly turning informant. Nothing that couldn't be attributed to bad luck or coincidence, but Minho recognized the pattern. The slow, methodical dismantling of everything he'd built. And then came the threat that froze his blood. One of his security team, a man paid to watch the Grand Hyatt, reported men following Zara and the girls. Men who didn't belong to Minho's organization. Men who moved with the practiced invisibility of hunters. The message couldn't have been clearer. Acknowledge these children publicly, make them part of your life, and they become fair game in the war between powerful men. Minho had built his empire on calculated risks, on knowing which threats to answer with violence and which to negotiate away. But this was different. This was his children. Innocent lives who had no part in the blood feuds and power struggles of his world. For the first time in his adult life, Kang Minho felt true fear. Not for himself, but for 3 little girls who carried his blood and his enemy's attention. For Zara, whose only crime had been loving him once, long ago in a different world. The solution came to him in the darkness before dawn, as he stood on his penthouse balcony, watching his city awaken. His city, his empire, his prison. Minho made the call at 5 a.m., waking Marcus, his second-in-command and oldest friend. The only man in his organization who knew about Zara and the girls. The only man he trusted with what needed to be done. I need to disappear, Minho said without preamble. Not just me. 5 people. Completely. New identities, new locations, no connections to the past. Marcus was silent for a long moment. You're talking about burning everything to the ground. Yes. The organization will survive without me, or it won't. Either way, I'm done. Another pause, longer this time. This is about the children. They're being watched, followed. It's only a matter of time before they're used against me. You could send them away, set them up somewhere safe, somewhere distant. You don't have to. I'm not sending them away. The decision, once made, felt immovable. I'm not losing another 5 years. I'm not becoming my father, visiting his family when it's convenient between business dealings. This is suicide, Min-ho. You know what happens to men who try to leave our world. Then I'll have to make sure I'm the first to succeed. The plan took shape over 3 sleepless days and nights. Money moved through shell companies and offshore accounts. Properties changed hands. Evidence was gathered. Insurance against those who might pursue them. Blackmail material that made mutually assured destruction the only rational choice for those who might consider revenge. Through it all, Min-ho continued his Saturday visits with the girls. Each moment now precious beyond measuring. Each smile, each laugh, each small connection a treasure he stored away, uncertain if these borrowed hours were all he would ever have with them. Zara sensed the change in him, the new urgency beneath his calm exterior. After the girls had fallen asleep during a movie night in their hotel suite, she confronted him in the small kitchenette, voice low to avoid waking them. "What's happening? And don't tell me nothing, because I've seen that look before, the one that says you're calculating risks and preparing for war." Min-ho considered lying, considered shielding her from the truth. But she deserved better than more deception. "You're being followed. All of you. Men who work for my father-in-law." Fear flashed across her face, quickly controlled for the sake of the children sleeping in the next room. "Why? We're no threat to him. You are. You represent everything that threatens the alliance between our families. The proof that I had a life, loves, commitments before the strategic marriage that benefited his position and my business. We'll leave. Tonight. Go back to Boston, disappear. It won't matter. He'll find you." Min-ho's voice hardened. "Men like Chun don't allow loose ends to remain untied." "Then what? What's the solution?" The panic she'd suppressed began seeping through. "Because I will not let my daughters become collateral damage in your war with your father-in-law." "Our daughters," he corrected gently. "And neither will I." He laid out the plan then. New identities, a new life far from Seoul, far from the Kong family business, far from everything he built and everything that threatened them. A clean break, a fresh start, a chance to be the family they should have been from the beginning. "You want us to run away together?" Disbelief colored her voice. "Just like that? Leave everything behind?" "Not everything, just the parts that are poisonous. Just the empire built on fear and blood. And you think you can just walk away from that life? That they'll let you go?" "No, they won't let me go." His expression darkened. "Which is why I have to make sure they have no choice." The evidence he'd gathered over years, insurance he'd never thought he'd need to use. Proof of judicial corruption that would destroy Chen's career and reputation. Documentation of his own family's criminal enterprises that would tear down the legitimate facade they'd constructed. Mutual destruction as the price of freedom. "You'd burn it all down?" Zara asked, something like the old wonder in her voice. "Everything you've built?" "For them." Min-ho looked toward the room where his daughters slept, unaware that their futures hung in the balance of decisions made by adults playing dangerous games. Yes, without hesitation. The truth settled between them, reshaping the landscape of possibility. This was not the carefree student she'd fallen in love with in Boston, nor the cold crime lord who had walked away from her for the sake of duty. This was a man at a crossroads, choosing a path that might lead to destruction or redemption. "When?" she asked finally. 3 days. Be ready to leave everything behind except what the girls can't live without. No electronic devices, nothing that can be tracked. And if this fails? If they come after us anyway?" Min-ho met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll protect you with everything I have. With my last breath if necessary." Something shifted in Zara's eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of trust. of belief in the man he was trying to become rather than the man who had abandoned her. 3 days, she repeated. And then what? What happens to us? To you and me? The question he'd been avoiding, the future he'd been afraid to imagine. That depends on whether you can forgive me, whether there's anything left to rebuild from the ashes of what I destroyed. I don't know, she answered honestly. I just know I won't let our daughters pay the price for our mistakes. Neither will I. The promise hung between them, fragile but real, the first foundation stone of whatever might come next. The final day arrived wrapped in Seoul's autumn mist, the city's edges softened by fog that rolled in from the Han River. Min-ho stood in his penthouse one last time, looking at the empire he'd built, the kingdom he'd inherited, the prison he'd constructed around his own soul. Behind him, a single suitcase contained the only possessions he was taking into his new life: photographs of his mother, a watch his grandfather had given him before the family business consumed their relationship, small mementos of a childhood before power became the only currency that mattered. Everything else, the designer suits, the luxury cars, the properties scattered across continents, all of it stayed behind, evidence of a life abandoned, a man who no longer existed. His phone rang one final time. Marcus, confirming that everything was in place. The documents delivered to trusted journalists with instructions to publish if anything happened to Min-ho or his family. The accounts transferred, the identities created, the escape route secured. Are you sure about this, boss? Marcus asked, the familiar title a reminder of everything Min-ho was walking away from. There's still time to reconsider, to find another way. There is no other way. Min-ho watched Seoul disappear into fog, the city becoming ghost-like, insubstantial. Not if I want to be the father they deserve. And the organization? Will survive or it won't. The detachment in his voice surprised even him. I'm choosing a different legacy now. As he hung up, Min-ho felt a weight lifting. The burden of empire, of duty, of family expectations he'd carried since childhood. In its place came a different weight, the responsibility of 3 young lives who would depend on him not for power or protection but for love, for guidance, for the 1,000 small moments that built a childhood worth having. Zara and the girls waited at the private airfield as arranged, for small suitcases containing their entire lives. The children were excited by the adventure, unaware that they were leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe, unaware that the man they knew as Mr. Kong was gambling everything on a chance to be the father he should have been from the beginning. Ready? He asked Zara as they boarded the plane that would take them far from Seoul, from Judge Chen's influence, from the Kong family legacy. No, she answered honestly. But sometimes ready isn't an option. As the plane took off, carrying them into clouds that obscured the city below, Min-ho watched his daughters. Mina reading her book, Jia photographing the ascent through the small window, Sora bouncing with excitement at the adventure. 3 perfect mirrors of himself and Zara, untouched by the darkness that had defined his existence for so long. They didn't yet know he was their father. That revelation would come later, when they were safe, when the wounds of the past had begun to heal, when Zara decided the time was right. But they knew him now, his smile, his laugh, his capacity for kindness. The foundation was laid for whatever came next. Beside him, Zara's hand rested on the armrest, a small distance from his own. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. Close enough that he could imagine a future where that distance might close, where forgiveness might make room for something new to grow from the ashes of what they'd lost. Min-ho had ruled Seoul's underworld with a calculated coldness that made even hardened criminals tremble. He had built an empire on fear and blood and the ruthless pursuit of power. He had sacrificed love for duty, passion for family honor, humanity for control. And now he was walking away from all of it for the sake of 3 little girls with his eyes and his blood and his hope for redemption. For the chance to build a different legacy. One measured not in territory controlled or enemies defeated, but in bedtime stories and birthday celebrations and the 1,000 small moments that made a life worth living. As Seoul disappeared beneath the clouds, Kang Min-ho felt himself disappearing too. The crime lord, the dutiful son, the strategic husband all fading away. In their place, a simpler truth emerged, the only one that mattered anymore. He was a father,